Hello everyone, welcome to Earth Central, the podcast of Orbify, where we invite sustainability experts to discuss about sustainability matters. Today we have with us Matías, who is working with Puro.earth, and we're very glad to have you here. I'm very excited that you joined us, and I would like to know about yourself a bit more about Puro.earth. What are you doing? What is your role there? What is your vision, mission, and in general, give us a nice background about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Konstantinos. It's a pleasure being here with you and with your audience as well. Yeah, as you said, my name is Matías Yudelevich. I'm account director for EMEA at Puro.earth. We are the leading and first crediting platform focusing exclusively on durable carbon removals. Obviously, we're working in the voluntary carbon market. I'm originally from Chile. I'm based in Berlin. I've been living here for around a year and a half. Quite settled, but still, big city with a lot of things. So still, getting to know my quote unquote new home. Still, it's a process, very fascinating as well to be in a place like this. And I've been with Puro for almost 2 years now. And essentially, I work mostly on the supply side, meaning with the project developers in their evaluation, assessment, or eligibility, and essentially doing the whole onboarding process, and then as well as managing and accompanying in their management in their accounts. In terms of issuances, helping them navigate a registry, etc., etc.
Nice. And I mean, we've seen that Puro, and we see Puro that's actually kind of a leading company when it comes to voluntary carbon markets, and you have a very nice presence everywhere. And I would like to know what actually differentiates you from the other companies that kind of do similar things that you do.
hmm Yeah. So first, like for me, it's a very powerful thing, and it's very nice. That when you go to different conferences or you speak with people that are embedded in the world of the voluntary carbon markets or have a good notion about it, it's very nice to kind of be recognized as a household name. It's very rewarding in a way to work with a company that is recognized in that way, and I think it's a well-deserved reputation. And to answer your question, essentially, I think that Puro came to fill a niche, a vacuum that it was at the moment in the voluntary carbon markets, where you will have, obviously the traditional registering standards such as Vera and Gold Standard, right? Focusing on a wide array of different methodologies. And then there was this vacuum where no one was really specializing on engineer slash durable removals, and Puro came to fill that vacuum essentially and really place a very very strong foothold on that niche. And I think that's something that obviously we see that there was a big appetite for someone to fill that gap within the VCM, and obviously we're seeing the fruits of that bet now. So yeah, has been a very very interesting journey. Obviously, a lot of lessons learned on the way. We're still learning, transitioning obviously from a startup to a more consolidated company. Against what people think, which is a good thing, that people have that perception. We are not such a big company, right? We're still a startup. Quite a lean team in all departments. So obviously, that comes with challenges, and as we grow, obviously we learn on the way, and to be able to have the most relevant role as we can in the VCM.
And I mean, the whole thing about VCM, that the main keyword about VCM that's trending everywhere is transparency. Transparency
Yeah.
and credibility. It's like everywhere you're going to search about volunteer carbon market, the next word you're going to say is transparency. And I would like to know how Puro is actually taking care of transparency and long lasting credibility of your carbon projects. How do you work on that field?
Yeah, that's essentially, it's the most important thing, right? Like, as you said, it's a voluntary carbon market.
Exactly.
So without trust, there isn't such a thing as this thing that we call the voluntary carbon market. So obviously is quite crucial, right? And in a sense, that transparency is to have everything outlined beforehand, right? A very, again, public facing standard with all the rules. You go to our website, for instance, you can access our general rules, our methodologies. We do everything in a very open way and very scientifically based, right? For example, when we write a new methodology, there is a whole kind of scientific method
Yes.
mechanism in place when we have an independent scientific advisory board, right, that are the ones at the end of the day that decide which kind of methodologies are the ones that we are going to work on. We have an open working group with different leading players in the industry, whether it's projects that are working on a particular methodology, people from the academia and the scientific community. We have like a wide array of partners, or let's call it a better way, collaborators, associates from the CDR world, right, in the academia, in the hundreds of people that have recognize the importance of collaborating in order to create a higher standard as possible, right? And I think that that's also something that the market and every player in the ecosystem understands, that in a way, obviously, you have competition and different roles being played by different companies and some overlap in different things as in any market, but there is this
Right.
very clear understanding that trust is, at the end of the day, the backbone of the market. Therefore, we need to collaborate and establish best practices. And this is essentially the backbone of the way that we operate, that transparency, accountability, making sure that every single detail in our methodologies are made in a way that is traceable and accountable. In
Mhm.
terms of obviously MRV processes, they're one of the most important factors to be considered, right, in the eligibility of a project and the real climate impact of their processes and their activity. And again, the safeguards, right? The safeguards are obviously a very important thing. As you have check and balances in a democracy, this is the same. We have the scientific advisory board. There are the ones at the end of the day deciding on the implementation methodologies or any updates. The same as public grievances mechanisms, etc. We are in that sense like a very like open. We have an open door policy to get that feedback from the market, from the different players, because the only way that this can work and be successful at the end of the day.
Mhm. It's very interesting, actually. It's very nice. And I think in Orbify, we also kind of do something very similar. We really believe that collaboration with different stakeholders is a key to volunteer carbon markets because it's like, as you said, there are so many players right now in this market, which is very nice and essential. And all of us fighting for the same purpose to make the carbon markets as transparent as possible. I think it's the only way that this could work because all of us have different powers and different, like, also, disadvantages. And then by combining all that, we can build a very nice ecosystem.
Yeah,
And I would like to go to
definitely.
know, sorry, yeah. So I would like to know a bit more about, I mean, because you collaborate with so many people, you have also academics, you have also like scientific based behind. And I would like to know how you see the trend of volatile carbon market, how you see the market, this market going or growing or not growing. How do you envision it?
Hmm. Yeah, obviously there are a lot of like dissenting views on it, right? On what kind of methods are gonna take the leading role in the future, which won't, whether the market's gonna grow, whether the compliance markets are gonna take over. Obviously, there is a lot of uncertainty, but uncertainty also it's a key to excitement, I think, an
Right.
exciting, evolving, dynamic market. But I think on the bottom line, there is a lot of appetite for the growth of the market. We see that in the trends, especially obviously I can talk more about durable carbon removals, right? Engineer removals, we see like growing exponentially over the last couple of years. If you see, the trends, the analytics, even compared to last year, right? The volumes of the offtakes being signed by companies across methodologies, whether it's BEX or biochar and enhanced rock weathering, they're quite considerable. And we also see, even though obviously the big players and especially Microsoft continues to be kind of the hegemon of the durable carbon removal world, and we obviously very much hope that they will continue to have a very huge role in the market. We do see slowly but surely the introduction of new players, and I think that's the most important like sign that you can see of the growth and the robustness of the market is the fact that you have these other players coming in and integrating a durable CDR into their portfolio, both on an investment standpoint, but also, in the decarbonization strategy, right? And that's, I think, is the key of how we as an industry in the durable removal side of things can help penetrate these new industries. And I feel that, again, going back to that collaboration, that's essential, right? So we, at the end of the day, have this big platform, as we call it, right? An ecosystem where we allow for the interaction of different players in the durable CDR world. So I feel that here, for example, is where intermediary sales channels play a major role, where they have, work with corporates that are traditionally engaged in other kinds of credits, right? And obviously recognizing that many industries have hard to abate emissions don't engage so much with carbon removals that have like a higher premium in terms of price, right? But they're slowly kind of getting a taste of it, right, by including a small portion, fraction in their portfolio of durable removals and understanding how does it work, and getting like a good feel about it, right? And that's on one side. And on the other side as well is all the, for example, SBTI commitments, right? So we have that kind of
Right.
goal of 2030 when many companies, the ones who have, committed to SBTI in this case, have to include durable CDR into their decarbonization strategy, right? So that would be, in a way, kind of like from a compliance standpoint within the voluntary carbon market. So obviously that will be a major boost for demand, but also it's very important to understand that there is a chicken or the egg situation where investment and engagement needs to happen now. Otherwise, we won't have companies standing at that
Right.
stage in order to provide that supply, right? So at the end of the day, this is a big encouragement, obviously, from our side, and everyone recognizes the importance of doing, as the SBTI calls it, beyond value chain mitigation practices, which in this case, it's starting investing now, starting engaging with different suppliers or projects, signing offtake agreements that would allow them to have the infrastructure in place to meet that demand from 2030 onwards. Otherwise, obviously, they won't be able to meet it. So that's very important to recognize as well.
And what would you advise to large, small, medium companies in order to actually, start integrating, invest in more carbon removals? Like, how would you advise these companies to start integrating this market? What are the steps for someone who doesn't know?
Yeah, so obviously it's a very, you can approach that from many different angles. I would say, um, in terms of how including durable CDR shapes behavior of companies, there have been very interesting studies. If I'm not mistaken, the last one was from BCG, early 24, if I'm not mistaken, that
Hmm.
showed a very nice trend that where companies engage and include durable CDR into their portfolios, then their whole mindset in terms of decarbonization practices really become more efficient, because there is a pain point in the sense of the pricing that they're paying for that premium in a way, right? So that makes them as well, in turn, more cognizant and more, you can call it disciplined in the implementation of their other practices for decarbonization. Because at the end of the day, also, I know we might touch upon it later, but in this sense also we recognize and we are shaped as a standard according to the decarbonization hierarchy of the Oxford Net Zero Initiative,
Okay.
in terms of understanding the hierarchy, right? Like, at the end of the day, remove is the residual emissions, right? It's at the bottom, sorry, at the inverted pyramid, right at the bottom of the pyramid. At the end of the day, first, it's reducing, right? So reducing, doing the pathway of decarbonization, and then residual emissions are the ones that you neutralize with removals, right? So at the end of the day, I feel that at this stage, durable CDR plays a major role in order to dictate and shape the behavior of companies vis-a-vis the decarbonization strategy.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And how did you feel about this? Kind of like a bit out of the what we discussed and what we have in the file, but I just want to ask you, how did you feel about when
Okay.
the when the science-based initiative report, the recent one, was released that actually said that they're not sure about carbon markets and how they're going to contribute to net zero, and then when it's like we've seen a major airline kind of like stepping back from this initiative just because of the fear of not meeting net zero goals. How did that affected you? How you seen also the volunteer market kind of communicating back about this this report?
Mhm. Yeah, it's again, it's tricky. Obviously, it's tricky in the sense that the market, let's say, needs to hear clear signals, right, in
Right.
order to implement practices. But again, it's an evolving field, right? And we need to recognize and not be naive in terms of
True.
the complexity of climate change, and at the end of the day, human behavior and how companies develop, and the different incentives, pressures, and shortcomings that they have in implementing certain things. Right, in this case, the carbonization practices.
Right.
So we don't need to be discouraged. I think quite the contrary, to understand the challenge that we have ahead. As I see it, right, working in climate at the end of the day as a civilization to tackle this problem that we have created, or as we might say, inherited in a way from our parents and grandparents, but that's a different
Right.
discussion. Because we reap the benefits out of it, right? Let's not
Yeah,
be
true.
hypocritical about it.
We make an industry out of
Um,
it.
yeah, exactly. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of challenges, and there are companies that they get cold feet because they understand. Okay, our
Right.
stakeholders are pushing for margins, 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 and we sometimes you have public companies that are tied to pension funds, right? And they can't afford. Hey, yeah, we had to reduce this by X%, and that's why the dividends are not going to be as they should have been, or what we forecasted, etc., etc. With that said, that's obviously on the side of the market and the complexity of changing our system, our way of living at the end of the day. But then, companies coming out of SBTI also is in line with other initiatives that have
Right.
come in place. For example, the new one established by Amazon. There are many companies that are coming on board with that. Other big stakeholders are having their own targets, for example, BlackRock and others. So there are kind of different mechanisms. I don't feel that the fact that some companies are withdrawing from their SBTI commitments, it means that they don't have the commitments any longer. In
Right.
many cases, is that they're doing their own thing or joining other efforts. But obviously, we recognize and very much appreciate the relevance of SBTI, and what it's something I've been discussed also with them quite openly, and I think by not only by us, but many other players in the industry, is the fact that they need to send stronger signals in terms of the
Oh,
role of
100%.
CDR.
Yeah.
And I even brought it up last year with some people of SBTI when I was in London in the Net Zero Festival. I don't know if you're aware of it. That I said, hey, we have a lot of people telling us that they're not going to start engaging with CDR because you, according to them, you are saying that you can't include
Right.
engage with removals until 2030. And this is like, no, that's not what we're saying. We're just saying that you can do it within the framework of beyond value chain mitigation. But that's not very clear, right? So obviously, we're happy to see that they see it that way. But what we need is for the public to understand what that means, right? And I think there is a big kind of a lot of like mist around what they really mean by this, and there needs to be a better job by communicating that message, so the market gets the right signals. um, but yeah, obviously we do appreciate, and I personally appreciate it. I think they play a very important role, but we
Right.
need to be better at communicating, so companies don't become complacent and get the wrong idea of what they are requesting.
But I think this is also a fault of media. Like the moment this report dropped down, everybody was in the media panicking and saying how SPTI is not going to support volunteer carbon market and how it is like completely against. But if you read the report, you see that this is not what they actually say. It's like
Yeah,
complete different kind of messaging, and how they were actually communicated throughout other media was kind of very confusing for many companies, I guess. But also from their side, I would also not go out and say, yes, we support volatile and capital markets if still it's not proved that the market is a clear market. Like, of course, I have also to be safe as they're scientifically based. So I fully agree with what you said. And I think it definitely was not the best news to read that report, but at the same time, it
yeah,
really made sense. But about talking about media, we see like I mean throughout the whole 2024, we see those like ups and downs when it comes to media and how it was affecting the market. We've seen many newspapers and magazines talking very, how to say that, very vocally about capital markets, and sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way.
yeah.
But there was one specific article by Guardian. I'm sure, I mean, you know it, everybody knows it, that brought a lot of focus, bad and good focus on volatile capital markets. How do you think the media played a role in 2024 when it comes to the carbon
Hmm.
market?
Yeah, obviously it's tricky in a way. There are a lot of controversies around
Right.
it, but I would say, and this is something that I also brought up in several panels that I've been, the fact that I feel overall, whenever you are in the spotlight, it means that you're doing something. And again,
Agree.
going back to the check and balances, as with our political system, I feel the media plays a major role of
Yeah.
raising the bar in a way to like incentivize us to raise the bar and do things better. And so that it's something that I personally welcome.
Hmm.
And I also think, again, we don't need to be hypocrites about the fact that everything is perfect and everyone is perfect, because we are
Right.
in a very complex, trying to solve a very complex issue, right? And we need to understand there are going to be a lot of mistakes and a lot of lessons learned. Obviously, with this, I'm not being an apologist and
Yeah.
saying, if there was any ill intent or profit on taking the lead in terms of the priorities on certain activities. But I'm saying, obviously, there are things that need to be perfected, and as we grow and new breakthroughs come around in terms of different technologies, etc. There is a very very steep learning curve, and I feel that we as a whole sector, we need to understand that and be able to do better. And I think the media
Right.
plays a major role in that sense. But also, if my add to that, I think like if we start from the beginning of like the 223 article, right? So let's say this is more like the sequel, right? Let's say the
Yeah.
original one. Actually, on a personal note, it really helped me in my journey into engaging with the VCM and getting into carbon, because at that time I remember I was like engaging in sustainability. I was part of this group here in Berlin. Before joining Puro, and I was looking into getting, I was working in solar before, and I wanted to get more neto into sustainability strategy, decarbonization, etc. And I joined this webinar about the backlash of the Guardian article and the VCM and
Right.
challenges and best practices being implemented. And actually, Puro was brought up as one of those companies implementing best practices to kind of
Oh, nice.
improve the voluntary carbon markets. And essentially that's how like I went on LinkedIn and I looked it up, and then I saw that they have an opening and I applied, and here I am now. So
So
in a
the media
sense,
really helps you. Yeah.
yeah, in a sense, right, that's kind of like in my very humble insignificant example, right? It's kind of to illustrate the fact that the media does play an important role, right? If you
True. Yeah.
extrapolate that in our actual relevant scale, you can understand where I'm going to with this. So yeah, that's kind of on a side note. how
And
that media spotlight played into my own journey.
And how do you believe that this forms some misconceptions on the audience? Because I really think that before these two articles, people were not very aware of carbon markets, and then somebody suddenly everybody knew about them, and of course many misconceptions were starting to be built about these markets. Can you tell me a
Yeah,
few misconceptions that you heard, and maybe how Puro is kind of taking care of them?
sure. So I feel the first and most important one is the greenwashing. At the end of the
Right.
day, kind of doing, okay, let's show the world with our sustainability report, nice pictures, and whatever kind of offsetting that we have done to show that we're doing something for the environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we can continue business as usual. I think that's the big thing, right? Like business as usual, we're just throwing some like roses and jumping rabbits to the side to kind of blind
Right.
them as a small screen for what's going on in the background, right? And I feel that's where the decarbonization hierarchy and being very adamant in
Mm-hmm.
implementing and communicating that plays a major role, right? And that's the way we see it. Again, as I said, right, we built our standard based on the Oxford Net Zero Initiative, and actually the chairman of the Oxford Net Zero Initiative, Miles Allen, he's the chairman of our scientific advisory board.
Oh, that's very
And
nice.
so, that's kind of our big commitment to
Right.
really understand and make that case that actually durable removals are to be implemented as part of the neutralization of your residual emissions, and
Mm-hmm.
not taking kind of instead of decarbonization strategies, right? So I think that's the main
Yeah.
thing, to make people understand that, and to have really projects that have the right MRV processes and that transparency that we're talking about, that actually have a real climate impact in the long term. uh,
Right.
and that's the way that we need to communicate, and that's the only way that actually the carbon market makes sense in my opinion, right? So you use it for the right purposes, and you use something that actually is meaningful and has the impact that you're supposed to implement. And
Right.
so, yeah, I feel that now we're doing a better job at doing that as a whole. And I feel that, again, coming back, circling back into that collaboration, I think it's the main point here, right? To work as an industry, to do like a mea culpa, understand what are our shortcomings, how
Mm-hmm.
can we improve, what are the things that need to be communicated, the good things that we're doing, and then build up from there. And yeah, and then obviously you have in the media many examples of success stories, and where the carbon
Yeah.
markets are working. And yeah, and I hope that in the near future and in the long term as well, we'll have many more of those stories. But obviously there are gonna be other bad stories, right, as you have
Definitely.
in every sector.
100%.
And I
Exactly.
feel like, just last comment on this, I feel that at the end of the day, there has to be a balance as well, because at one point I feel that the utter scrutiny, at the end of the day, the only thing that achieves is to provide fuel to the deniers of, you
Exactly.
see, like, this is all, BS. Let's not really get into this, right? Like, all these sustainability strategies is all just like a screen, and so why are we bothering to even engaging on this conversation? So at the end of the day, I feel what we need is to have an open discussion, to implement best practices where they need to be implemented, and then move forward and scale up, right? And really reach out to larger audiences, because again, we need everyone on board if we want to actually change things at a global scale.
True. This is right. And I was talking with a person, another person in carbon markets, who's actually Elias Sare. He works in the Renoster. And he told me something very interesting the last, couple of months before. He told me that the journalists that write these articles is not like they want to write these articles. Is that the carbon market right now, the state it is actually, makes them write these articles, but then we can take them and actually make a change and then make them write something nice about the carbon market. And I think this really resonates on how generally media work, and we should all have in mind and go and fix them as much as we can. And
Yeah.
but the way is like there is one more confusion in the audience, and we see that also from Orbify perspective, but I'm sure you also noticed that. What is the difference between avoidance and removal carbon markets?
Right. Yeah, that's an important one.
Yeah.
Obviously, I feel many people don't understand. But to be fair, right, it's like we work in the niche of the niche of the niche of sustainability. And to be fair
Exactly.
with you, I've even been in conferences about sustainability that even there people don't really understand the
Yeah, this is
difference on
true.
how carbon markets work. But at the end of the day, there are many other topics I don't understand. So fair game. But yeah, at the end of the day, you have different kind of credits. They're not all
Mhm.
created equal, as we say, in a way. And again, going back, circling back to that climate impact at the end of the day, right? When you have an
Mhm.
avoidance credit, essentially is that you are, at the end of the day, the ton of carbon that you are emitting gets emitted, and then that ton is avoided somewhere else. So then you have
Okay.
1 plus 0 equals 1. There's still
Mhm.
one, sorry, so yeah, 1 minus 1 equals 0. Sorry. So at the end of the day, you are not having like a carbon negative impact there. So as I said, right, there is a big difference, and at the end of the day, we're in a very niche part of the sustainability world, so we understand there is a confusion, right? So at the end of the day, the avoidance credit is you're, at the end of the day, avoiding, but a ton is still being emitted into the atmosphere, right? When you
Okay.
engage on removal, at the end of the day, you don't have that emission, right? So at the end of the day, you are also reducing, and in best case scenario as well, having negative emission. It's a negative emission, right? Because you are not only avoiding emitting an extra ton, but you're actually removing a ton of
Removing.
CO2 from the atmosphere. And at the end of the day, that's very important also from a science standpoint. Well, this is still science, but I mean, in terms of, like the IPCC reports will
Mhm.
say that at the end of the day, in order to stabilize the carbon, the ppm, right, in the atmosphere, we actually need to actively go carbon negative, because the molecules, carbon molecules, stay in the atmosphere for many decades, right?
Right.
So in order to really be able to cool down the planet, right, we need to remove in order to stabilize that kind of like offshoot, and the fact that the carbon stays for much longer, right? It doesn't really dissipate in a couple of years. So if we really want to stabilize the ppm in the atmosphere, we really need to actively remove carbon in order to stabilize the atmosphere, right? So in that sense, carbon removal is ever relevant.
Right. No, that's a very good explanation, and I'm sure that now it's going to be more clear for everybody who has this question, and I guess for our audience also will have this more clearly in their minds now. So that's important. And another thing that I noticed a lot in your website and also in your profile that I would like to discuss is about the biochar in the global south. We see this kind of like popping up recently, and I would like to know why do you see that as a game changer in the global south, and what can you give me like a nice overview about it in general?
Yeah, sure. Uh, so yeah, again, obviously there is a lot of in everything, right, in development and obviously sustainability. The fact of all the debate about the global south, and how at the end of the day they
Right.
are paying the price for the industrialization of the global north. So now they're like doubling down on the injustice, right? And obviously there is a big political debate that you can get into when it comes to that, right? And the responsibility that needs to be taken by certain countries or others.
Hmm.
But at the end of the day, biochar represents a very, very interesting activity that can be taking place in the global south, right? In terms
Hmm.
of, for example, what you need to create biochar is biomass, right? And we see the biggest potential for biomass and waste biomass in particular, it's in the global south, right? So in that sense, the potential that you have in the global south compared to Europe, it's much much bigger, right? Obviously, biochar,
Okay.
thankfully as well. Like I deal with EMEA, so I work very closely with many projects here in Europe, and we see the biochar is growing exponentially here in Europe as well. But the big volumes, and even if you go, into our registry, you will see that the biggest players in terms of volumes are in the global south because of the availability of biomass, right? So in that sense, at the end of the day, what we need is to scale up the market. So on one hand, you need for that to have a global reach. On the other hand, as well, is to untap the potential for feedstock in the case of biochar, right? So in that sense, if we want to have those um, projects, right, facilities that have an output of hundreds of thousands of tons per year, you need to onboard on an industrial scale many players in the global south, right? And also in that sense, I feel that it has like a very good story and like a lot of co-benefits if you think about biochar and um, all the positive impact that it has, right? The product itself, besides the carbon removal attribute, is it's been proven in terms of like the improvement in crop yields, right? Not only in the production but also on water usage. So obviously now also, especially due to climate change, you have a lot of like water scarcity and water stressed communities in the global south that lack the infrastructure to kind of like compensate on that crisis, right? At the end of the day, you need to have more efficient and more resilient crops, right? And biochar really plays a major role in that. So in that sense, you can kill two birds with one stone, and we see a lot of like very good case studies, right, of companies that have kind of like a closed circle, where they source, for example, a company that source um, um, crops from a particular cooperative of farmers. They use the waste biomass as feedstock for biochar, and then they apply that same biochar into those farming communities, right? So you have like a win-win, a virtuous circle at the end of the day when you are
Right.
untapping the potential of creating large-scale biochar facilities, but at the same time you're also contributing, to the development of the communities, both economically, but also in terms of food security, et cetera, and also decreasing
Environmentally
the
also.
usage of, artificial fertilizers, right?
Exactly.
So in that sense, also increases the quality of the food that we are ingesting overall. And so yeah, biochar plays could play, and it's starting to play a major role in
Very
the global
large, yeah.
south, and kind of like how communities can take
Can you hear me?
climate action in this sense, and at the same time help local communities in terms of their agricultural practices.
Yes, but without sounding pessimistic in any way, because I really agree with what you said, but I would like also to see the other side of the coin. So, what are the challenges in order to scale biochar in the global south? And then, how also to overcome these kind of challenges?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a very relevant point in the sense of, given the lack of resources in a way, it's much harder to implement a facility on a large scale,
Right.
right? On an industrial scale. So, for example, you have a lot of like Contiki pyrolyzers, which at the end of the day is kind of like an open pit. So you don't have really a very good control in terms of emissions and calculating what the impact it is of the process of producing the biochar. And so you have a lot of like infrastructure issues, right? So on one hand, for example, something we encounter obviously is financing, which is the most obvious one.
Yeah.
Also the commissioning of machinery, right? Sometimes the infrastructure to import machinery is complicated and has a certain hurdles associated with it. And also, the fact, and it's something that I have encountered personally when dealing with projects, the fact that there is no the infrastructure in place to run the necessary tests that we, for example,
Right.
request. in the MRV process, right? There are not, let's say, certified labs that are able to perform certain tests, and then sending them to Europe or doing it in a collaboration with other players is extremely expensive. So we do see, unfortunately, projects failing to meet those requirements because of the lack of infrastructure in the countries that are where they are located, right? On the other hand, as well, is, for example, for us, right? At the end of the day, when we close the circle, and biochar is, and in all of our methodologies, at the end of the day, if when we can have the highest level of certainty possible that the carbon is not going to be re-emitted, right? So in the
Right.
case of biochar, this is set up at the end use of the biochar, right? So just by producing biochar, you are not you don't get an issuance of credit just based on your output of biochar, but it's on the use of that biochar. That's what counts for the issuance
Yeah,
of the
this makes
credit,
sense.
right? So at the end of the day, you need to have an eligible end use for the biochar, and in many cases, there is no very mature market in those regions, right? So, for example, here in Germany, biochar is pretty well established, so there is an active market for us. There are players that are coming in kind of from like a commodity approach in order to like
Right.
build that kind of distribution network for biochar also in the global south. But I feel that in this case, the key to solve that problem is that closed loop that I was talking about, right? Have that very important feedback and collaboration with local communities where you have that exchange between biochar and the biomass, right? So at the end of the day, those communities are the ones that that
Are gonna
benefit from
solve
that
it.
biochar, right? But obviously, then there are other economic considerations in that. So you can talk about public-private partnerships in terms of in terms of like subsidies on in a way that the government of that particular place can chip in order to provide a biochar for communities, obviously having the proper MRV processes in place so that the end use can be accounted for. But yeah, but obviously there are different solutions for that, and also I feel that's where financing, investment funds become very relevant as well. It's when it comes at not prioritizing, but putting a fair share of emphasis on supporting projects in the global south on an industrial
Right.
scale. Because at the end of the day, as I said before, it's a virtuous circle. As as long as we get new projects on a larger scale coming up, then you have a proof of concept, and then the implementation will follow on a larger scale.
Yeah, but can you list kind of, because when it comes to local communities in the carbon markets in general, this is like a hot topic. We all discuss about it because we don't know how to implement them and how to integrate local communities. And you talk about biochar and actually how local communities can be benefit out of it. And can you list like, I don't know, 3, 4 ways that local communities can be benefit by biochar in the global south?
Yeah. So first, I think it's very important to highlight that it's something that we have a very important emphasis in our methodology for biochar, right? And all of our methodologies at the end of the day, which is stakeholder engagement. Uh, as part as some of the famous articles has been the grievances of like local communities being either displaced or overlooked in the implementation
Exactly.
of carbon projects, right? So for us, it's very crucial that the communities are engaged. They can voice their grievances if there are any grievances, and so this is not taken up like as a from an ivory tower, but really kind of working with the different relevant players and people that might be affected and benefited from the actual carbon removal activity, right? So that's very important to highlight. And as I said, I think at the end of the day, for local communities, in a way, is first the very obvious one, even if it's in a smaller scale, is employment. Right. At the end of
Right.
the day, when you're engaging in an economic activity, then you need workforce, and that workforce hopefully will be sourced locally.
Right.
So you have an active involvement in an industrial activity with local communities, and then obviously the most obvious one, as I said, is the agricultural impact, right? In terms of the crop yields, having more efficient agricultural practices, which unfortunately in many places in the developing world they're using the same very inefficient practices for generations.
Right.
They're very wasteful in terms of water, and at the end of the day, the yield also they're not very good. And in this case, by implementing biochar, as I said, you can achieve a lot of like water efficiency and also increase the crop yield. So that significantly creates a boost for obviously many communities that rely exclusively, unfortunately, in many cases, on agriculture. Um, and also as a source of revenue, right? In the sense of, in many cases you have, idle biomass, and that idle biomass can become a commodity by, selling it to biochar facilities in case that you don't have this closed loop, right? There are
Right.
different models. And then the most obvious one that we haven't addressed is the climate impact as well. So, for example, in many communities, when you have agricultural practices that are non-sustainable, you have slash and burn
Exactly.
practices, right? So at the end of the day, that pollutes the air in that same community. And then when instead of burning that biomass, idle biomass that you have, you use it for biochar in a closed circle, right? With emission control, then you tackle also the pollution factor.
Right. Yeah, that's very good points. And before I close the podcast and before we conclude, there is one traditional thing we do in every podcast, and I want to do it also with you. It's kind of a surprise for most of the guest speakers, so I hope you're not going to be also very surprised. I would like you to share with us and the audience something that motivates you, something inspirational that also the audience can get inspired by. And, let's say you have a tough day and then you're going to go back to this podcast, listening to this inspirational quote of yours, and then move on your day. So, do you have something in mind? Of course, you can take your time to think a bit, but it would be great
Yeah.
to share something.
So yeah, obviously, there could be a lot of things. I
Right.
don't have like many mantras, so to speak, that I use in my daily life. Maybe I should have. Uh, but I just want to remark something that made me want to work in the climate sector. And I feel that many people share this as well, right? Like I don't know, I'm being a very active person, very in touch with like outdoors, hiking, mountaineering, cycling, etc. I'm big on wildlife as well since I was a kid, and so I always had that kind of that affinity towards like climate, biodiversity, etc. Um, and at the end of the day, I feel that when we are discouraged by obviously all the massive challenges that we're facing and the frustrations of how slow we're going in terms of meeting targets, as a whole, right? All the issues with COP, et cetera, right? Like it could be an infinite list of things. At the end of the day, I
So
feel
true.
that our boost at least should come from the fact that we decided to devote our careers to make something, make a change, right? And I feel that that's what led me, even though it sounds a little bit cheesy, that what led me into really wanting to devote my career to climate is, in hindsight, I want to be able to tell myself that I did my best to contribute to tackle the most important challenge that we have as a civilization at our day in our day and age. So at the end of the day, I feel that's kind of my guiding light in a way of saying this is the biggest issue that we have.
Right.
Period. And even if my input would be very humble or very great, at least I know that I can be in peace with myself, that I'm trying the best to contribute in order to tackle that challenge and that problem. And so I feel that's something important to bear in mind when we're feeling that, like, okay, this is such a waste. We all have that moment, from time to time. And so, yeah, I
I
would
think
say
that's a very
that's
important.
the main
I
thing.
think that's a
Yeah.
very important point to everybody who works in climate tech. Sometimes we get so involved with business and we forget the main aspect of climate tech, which is actually climate. And this is a nice, motivation to have behind us to think that yes, we do all that's for the impact, not just for the business. and that's
Yeah.
that's very nice to hear that from you. And before we close, I would like to know where the audience can find you. If you're gonna go to any events sooner or later, if you're gonna have any panel discussion, maybe your LinkedIn, email, or anything you would like to share with them.
Yeah, you're more than welcome to add me on LinkedIn. You can see my full name on the screen. I know my last name is not the easiest to write down, but you have it here. You can pause the podcast and and just paste it on your LinkedIn search box. So more than welcome to connect on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. As well, if you are based in Berlin, I organize a meetup. We try to do it every month. It doesn't succeed very often to do it every month, but it's called the Climate Tech Network Group. So the idea is just people that are interested in climate or work in the space to share experiences, have a drink, be together,
Nice.
etc., etc., and foster this community. So if you follow me on LinkedIn as well, I post regularly there whenever we have events. So if you are in Berlin or you're just passing by, uh, you are more than welcome to join to our future events as well. And yeah, also I will be participating in the German Biochar Forum conference this 18th and 19th of November. So if you're there as well, be more than happy to say hello and to connect with you.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here with us. It was a very pleasure, and I think the audience will have some great insights.
Perfect. Thanks to you two for inviting me. Really, this was super cool. To be honest, I've never participated in a podcast before, even though I'm a big adept. I listen to podcasts on a daily basis. Yeah, I have like 3, 4 podcasts that I listen to regularly. Now I have a fifth as well. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it is to listen to my own voice, which I know no one really loves. But I will
No,
go
don't
through the
say
torture
that.
and see how
Well,
it came